Hi there, my name is Colin Sebestyen. You can find me at movecraft.com. I'm here today to talk to you about VDMX. You can find VDMX professional VJ software at VIDVOX.net. You can also find me at castingshadows.com. That's CSTNG-SHDWS. And here's some projects that I've made using VDMX software. So today, rather than doing something more like a tutorial with which buttons to press and which knobs to turn in which order, I thought it might actually be useful to talk about approach and specifically thinking about how you can design loops if you're using a loop performance paradigm to bring some more interest and variation to your loops. How do you build loops that are kind of dynamic and useful and extensible? I'm going to be showing as an example this project that I did with the musician Nonagon, and I suppose let me turn some of the volume up here so you can check out this audio visualization. So how can we build loops and use loops the same way a musician might, or really anyone who uses media? So I'm just gonna turn down the volume here, and I'm gonna kind of talk over this. Okay, so a lot of times when I see people perform with loops, it seems to me that they're just kind of triggering them almost in random order, without really giving a strong thought to sequence. The sequence in which we play the loops makes a really big difference. And actually, this is something called progression, that, you know, just the way a musician might talk about a chord progression, a visualist might also think about the way the imagery progresses. And when you're talking about loops, this means that something should stay the same, so that it stays on theme, is consistent, but then something should also change, so that it progresses as it moves forward. So one way to accomplish this is actually by having something consistent. In this case, we have the camera moving from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen through this building, and then the graphics that are inside of the building are changing. Now, because these loops are actually starting and stopping in the same place, this means that we can make a seamless loop. We can make a seamless connection with this consistent velocity camera moving kind of always to the right. Then we can introduce variation using effects and, kind of other maybe hooks into the music. So believe it or not, all this visualization that you're seeing right now, this is just 6 loops total. So if we think about how we might be able to kind of like smartly sequence and order our loops, we can build some pretty awesome experiences, and actually I think we can also, there's just the utility of this, we can just get more mileage out of them. So I thought I might show you kind of a breakdown of this project and how you might start to think about sequencing and thinking about your own loop-based performance paradigms. So I'm going to go ahead and I've prepared a couple quick loops here just to kind of maybe talk about and think about this sort of thing. So one thing that's kind of interesting is if you do audio or you build audio or you build music, basically everything loops. I mean, all you have to do is just have a chunk of audio, and then using a computer or a tape even, right, you can just play back the same sequence. And just by virtue of the cut in the time-based media, you can produce some sort of loop. Now, it's not always a great loop, but you don't really need to worry about things like registration. Now, obviously, if you want the loop to synchronize with a beat, then you're going to have to change the timing and the duration so that it matches, some sort of consistent rhythm or beat. But it's a little bit different if you think about visual loops. Like, actually, with visual loops, kind of like that last frame needs to match the first frame in some way. And that means that what you physically see on screen needs to be the same in order for there to be a seamless loop. Otherwise, it'll read as a cut. It'll actually like jump to some new piece of footage. So I think people who design loops, they kind of intuitively know this, and they take advantage of all kinds of different techniques to build seamless loops. A common example might be 0 and 360 degrees in a radial loop being kind of the same value, right? That if you end a value at 360 degrees, then you can pick right up where you left off at 0 degrees, and you've created a seamless loop. replication, making an exact duplicate, and then just making sure that a camera or position or value is at the same place will also kind of accomplish this. So let me open up Cinema 4D. This is actually the place I made these loops, and I can jump here to the perspective view, or actually here, just this 4-up view might be enough to kind of get a feeling for this. So as I play this over here in the upper left-hand corner, you can really see what's going on here with these loops, that actually up here at the top, there's just a replication of one room. And once the camera gets done on one side of the room, it'll just jump back to the other spot. Because this camera is moving in a linear fashion, and I need to make sure that if I come here to my scene and come to my camera, I've got something called a mover cam here. You can see this value here. This keyframe is actually going to always be linear. That means it's going to be moving at a consistent velocity. And this means that when we leave off at it here at the end of the loop and pick back up, it should be seamless as opposed to an ease. So now the exact kind of like how I produce these things in Cinema 4D, maybe we can leave that up to another tutorial. But I wanted to share with you some of the secrets that, first of all, you notice these columns. I'm definitely using them kind of as a cheat. I'm using them because I can cover up a seam, and that's basically definitely something that's going on in the construction of this loop. And then the background moves at a different rate as the foreground. So actually you can see this jump here. As it jumps, the background kind of changes. And so I actually had to render these out with kind of what was called an object buffer pass, basically a track mat, so that I could kind of like key the background back in here on this side so that it matched. But that's basically all I had to do. Once then I had my basic establishing loop, then I could kind of build variation on top of it. So once you have variation, that might look something kind of like this, right? Like you have your basic loop, and then the last frame, the first frame are the same, and then I'm adding different things on top of that loop in the design. So actually, as it turns out, it's quite easy to set something like this up in VDMX. And just with a simple option, let me go and show it to you. Let me open up my project here. And for this demo today, I'll just be loading in the 720p renders from Cinema 4D, but I'll include the 1080 HAP and JPEG renders in the downloads, so you guys can play around with these loops. So let's say I just wanted to trigger this right like that, and then basically when this is done, I want to have it trigger kind of the next loop. And actually, if you see here, trigger immediately up here at the top of your media bin, I can just say like, hey, next on movie end, and this means it's just going to now walk through these different loops. That when it's done, it's just going to go ahead and step to the next one. So very easily I can accomplish this like kind of concept of, hey, these things are always seamless. Each one leads to the next one. And then right here, it's going to go ahead and click over to the next loop, and we start to be able to see the variation. And the only thing we need to make sure is that the last frame and the first frame are the same. Cool. So we might also like to think, let me go ahead and come back here to trigger immediately so that I can trigger this next loop. So that's kind of taken care of. I mean, the other thing I would say is that what I like to do a lot is actually have these be random on movie end rather than next on movie end. If I was to, let me just go ahead and put these inside their own page. I'll call this startup shutdown, and I'll grab all these different loops, and I'm just going to drop them inside that page right there. And then I'm going to say random on movie end. So this is kind of nice because this means that, let me just go to immediately for now and trigger these guys, and then random on movie end. This means that when these guys are going to have a little event when they end, then it's actually going to randomize and choose just a random clip. And this is kind of great. I mean, I would probably start with the playing so that I can start to, build in some of the tension of the music and the progression of the music, as it's, music comes with all kinds of useful structure that you can borrow as a visualist, things like dynamics. And so you want to, increase the dynamics. When things get loud, you should add more stuff. When things get quiet, you should take stuff away. And by stuff, I mean, visual elements, colors, timing, effects, that sort of thing. Real quick, another quick tip. If I come in here to Media Bin 1 and come here to Options, I can also preload all this media. And that should also kind of help with, you guys are able to see a little bit of kind of like the glitch there when it's just kind of loading in the next video. And just a slight, this is going to depend on the performance of your system, of course, and you notice there's almost no glitch, and that's because I was able to preload all this media into RAM, and the size of the media will matter, the type of solid state drive if you have will matter, and the codec will matter. All these will kind of adjust to the performance, but I was able to definitely perform this way with these clips once I was able to preload it. Okay, so coming back here to this other page, let me come back here immediately, and this is kind of thinking about treating this sort of stuff as more like multi-track, like a multi-track session. And actually, you can borrow this from, you can borrow this idea from audio or music compositions and the way you might sequence music for interactive medium. Like they do this a lot with music for video games. The thing with music for video games is they don't really know what the duration is going to be. So oftentimes they'll have, say, like a bed, an underlying bed of music, maybe just something in the low register, like bass, and then they can put stuff kind of over the top that will add to the music to add tension. So that's we can borrow kind of this idea where we can have maybe like the background elements of the hallway, and then we can add some of the elements inside of the room as alpha channels. And this actually was my original intention with this project, to come in and do something kind of like that, where this would just be the plain bed kind of on the background, and then kind of these elements in the middle I could just kind of like bring in and combine in interesting ways because they'd all have alpha channels. But ultimately, actually, I really like the look of the reflections here kind of in the windows, and I also really like the look of the reflections on the floor and kind of the environmental lighting that was going on. So ultimately I decided what made the most sense for this project was to actually just have all these different clips on different layers, and then trigger the different layers and fade the layers in and out. So let's go ahead and build that project in VDMX and take a quick look at what that looks like. And that's actually kind of closer to the rig that I actually used in the video that you saw earlier. I'm going to go ahead and add the loops. And the other thing I think I'm going to do is it'll be a little bit more clear. I'm going to use a MIDI controller with this project, so I'm just going to load in my iPhone here. And actually, if you didn't know you could do this in VDMX, this is pretty awesome. If you just come here to your VidIn in your workspace inspector with Command 1, you can come here and just enable. I'm going to enable my iPhone, and great, there we go. And I'm going to come in here and come into plugins, and I'll add a preview. And under the preview, I can come here and find my iPhone. I'll go ahead and put this in the lower left-hand corner so you guys can see this. Great. So let's add these on some layers. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create 6 layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember that these are going to render from kind of like the bottom up. So layer 6 is actually going to be on the bottom. So I'll just rearrange them like this, I guess. Layer 1, 2, be fast in renaming them. 3, 4, 5, and then 6 on the top. Okay, so in layer 1, I want to go ahead and trigger the plain loop. And then in layer 2, I'll just start triggering the rest of them. And I probably might also want to think about the order in which I might want to bring these in. Probably have the more intense loops kind of towards the end. Okay, so now all these layers are in embed mode, so they're all adding on top of one another, but we can see they're all synchronized and playing back. We're getting a weird kind of overblown out ghosting effect here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these loops and I'm going to change the comp modes to over. And we should just end up with just kind of one loop, the last one at the end. That's going to be the final composite. And then, of course, I probably also want to control the opacities so that I can fade between the different loops. And so for this, actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and I'll create a control surface. And on the control surface, I'm going to just create 6 sliders. Now this isn't necessary, but it'll make things, I think, a little easier to see. So I'm just going to create 6 sliders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Great. And I'm just going to then kind of control these with the sliders here on my MIDI controller. So I'm going to come here and press, let me go into hardware learn mode, which can be found right here, Command L. And I'm going to go ahead and start with this first one, and the second one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Great. And then I'll turn that off. Then I'll come here to these layers and I'll just associate these with their sliders. Again, you can spend a little more time on this than I am if you want to label all these things or change the layout for these sliders so they match these sliders. Anyway, let's just come here and say use data source, and we'll use from our control surface slider 1, slider 2. Now I could just directly link these into the incoming MIDI, but I find it useful to actually hold these on an intermediary kind of control surface or intermediary value. That way you can kind of assign it to other things, or you can combine 2 things, or you can do kind of like you can it's nice to hold a value as an intermediate slider. So, or you could reassign this to a different MIDI controller, for example. Okay, so now I have these all synced on 6 sliders. Great. So now I should be able to have some control over these guys. Let me turn all our values down. So here's our first one, and then our second one, and then our next one, and our next one, and then our next one, and then our final one. Okay, so something that I notice is they're kind of crossfading, but they're not synced. And so that's what we got to do next. I'm going to make sure, I think I'm going to have a layer 1 be my master timing. And then I'm going to come here and I'm just going to use layer 1 drive layer 2, and layer 3 will get its value from layer 1's normalized time. Same with layer 4. I'm going to choose layer 1, normalized time, layer 5. And finally, so this way there's one timeline that's driving all of them, or one set of timing. And so now I should be able to, let's see, we're getting a little bit of slowdown here, and I think the slowdown is actually probably coming from my screen recording software is my guess. What I've done is I've actually synced them, and then I've just turned off the incoming normalized. So basically the playback of all these guys is synchronized now. No, I'm just not going to touch it. But rest assured, in my real project, they were synced the whole time. Just getting a little bit of slowdown here, I think, from capturing this whole screen. Okay, so this is great. Now we have this kind of always changeable, always adjustable. I can just add in the loop that I want seamlessly. Or I can have a blend between the two, for example. And I have this kind of like endless tunnel effect. Now, obviously, a really common request might be an endless tunnel for some visuals, and so I think this would be a pretty smart way to set one up. Okay, so basically we're kind of done with the stuff I want to show you as far as thinking about how you might be able to sequence your loops if you're doing a loop-based kind of performance. I thought I might run through just a couple of the effects that I used for this performance, just to show you kind of like some of the different looks that maybe, how might VDMX be able to like extend upon this. Now, of course, you can just kind of go nuts with all the effects. I'm going to come here to Canvas Main Output. I'm going to tear off that main output effects and start building some effects in here. You can add your usual things that might change the color or change the hue or create sort of geometry adjustments or mirroring effects or distortion effects. But I thought it might be cool to kind of like keep building things that might kind of work along with this idea of a hallway. Let's add in a bad TV effect. And actually the only reason I'm using this bad TV effect isn't for the distortive properties. Actually, I'm going to turn all that off, all the noise and distortion and speed and the scan lines. I'm just going to have those be zeros. I just want this nice scroll property. And the scroll property has a 0 to 1. That was actually pretty important. That means that was something I could just trigger. So if I just want to like scroll or right like that, I'm going to go ahead and put that on something triggerable. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in an LFO. And this LFO, I'm going to choose just the waveform. And I'll come to the waveform, and I'm going to make it just a nice kind of eased curve, something like this. And I think actually I only need a couple points here. Now by command dragging, this lets me pull out these nice Bezier handles. See this? So I want to have a nice kind of S curve here, and I'm not going to need this point in the middle. I'm going to just go ahead and delete it, and I'll command drag on that side. And pull that out. Let me make sure I'm doing this correct here. Just need one. That is giving me the CY Bezier. I don't want that. I want this to be 0.5 in the CX. There we go. So actually this might be a little easier to do numerically rather than with the interface. And I want these to be real big eases as much as they'll go. Great. Okay, so why am I doing that? This is going to let me actually kind of like have it slowly ease from one value to the next. I'm actually going to change this on to once, so this just triggers once. And I'm going to go ahead and on this bad TV, I come to scroll, and I'm going to use the LFO data source of the waveform, and now I can just do this, and I've got a nice kind of scrolling animation as this goes from 1 to 0. Now this is giving me there we go, the whole value. That's what I want. Okay, so when I'm pressing back here on measure, I want to make sure that it's going back all of the way. So actually I can just do this by just increasing my measures. I'm going to turn the clock off on this and turn up the seconds, and I just want to make sure this always goes back to the beginning. Maybe that's too long. Let's see. Now this, of course, you can kind of adjust all of this to taste if you want. So this little guy right here, I think it'd be pretty cool to have that. I'm just going to use MIDI detect, and I'm just going to assign that to just a button here that I can just press, and then I can just trigger that animation. And I'm going to increase the rate. Cool. And so what I did was whenever there's a bass hit or a big sub bass hit on the track, I'll go ahead and just scroll it down, and you saw some of that effect earlier. Okay, and now the other effect that I used was Impossible Tunnel. So I'm going to come here to my assets. I'm just going to go and search for it, and I'm going to drag it in. So this works quite well with a room style effect, particularly definitely with this kind of series of footage and clips. It's really giving us a, even though it's just kind of, it's, you know, all this is, it's kind of a cheat. It's definitely a 2D cheat, but it's giving us definitely a lot of perspective in here. So I kind of want to do something, I think, really similar with its LFO. I want the Z offset to go from, let's see, 0 to -4, and so I'm going to do something very similar there with that value. I'm going to go ahead and come into layers, or come into plugins, excuse me. Let's add another waveform, or no, we're going to need a whole other LFO here, a second one with its own waveform. And this LFO2, we're going to want to go ahead and something really similar here as we did with LFO1. And there it is right there. Let's just do 2 of these guys, 0 and 1. And I want to, let's see, start with a value and go down a value. So this is going to be 1, and this is going to be 0. And very similarly, this will be 0.5 and 0.5, say. Make sure that these guys are curved. Make sure they're Bezier. And you make sure these are zeros and the Y's, so they're flat. Curve response. There we go. And so let's go ahead and let's trigger this now. Let's make sure this is just once. And I can change the rate. And now let's make the Z offset. I'm going to say LFO2 waveform. So by default it's on -4, and I'm going to go ahead and trigger that right with that. There we go. So I'm going to MIDI detect that guy. There we go. And actually I want this then to also be kind of a toggle on the button. So this means if I toggle the button again, it turns off. And if I toggle the button again, it turns on. So that's giving me a nice like transition there. So when I'm ready for Impossible Tunnel to go on, I just click it and I get that nice Impossible Tunnel effect. And I've got a nice sash effect. All right. So those were the basic kind of like geometry adjustment things that I did. There was some other stuff that I did, you know, just some of the other kind of effects that I added on top, but I also built a quick look, and maybe I'll just finish up this tutorial by taking a look at the look that I built, the kind of grading, color grade look that I've got going on here. So I did that with a lens flare. And I also added some ghosting. And all this is kind of going in on the bottom. And you could save all this as an effects chain if you liked. And then I also added the Vade Bleach Bypass. There we go. Color effect. And I added also some Technicolor. There we go. And you can adjust all these things kind of to taste, right? I'm finding the ghosting to be too strong, so I can reduce this down, and the lens flare needs to come down too. There we go, just a little bit. I mean, what's really cool about this is this is a lot of this is stuff that I might add, say, in After Effects, but this is all live. Like, it's all, you know, I can adjust this stuff to the beat if I want. You know, it's very powerful to have this as a live generative effect. Also, Bleach Bypass is a little strong, so I can go ahead and find exactly the look that I want for these things, even though Strip Additive was kind of giving me the look that I wanted here. Great. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of kind of some of the fun things that you can do, thinking about animation, thinking about performance, and thinking about sequencing of your loops. So you can find me at movecraft.com. You can also find me on Twitter. Huge shout out to Nonagon. You can find him at nonagon.net if you like that music you heard earlier. This wasn't just a music kind of credit from him. He also kind of co-produced and co-collaborated with me. We built these things up together at the same time we were building the music. We were also building the visuals, so it was a true AV collaboration. And of course, you can find VDMX software at VIDVOX, and you can find them at Twitter at the at VIDVOX handle. So huge shout out to those guys. I'm going to include all of the material that I've used in today's demoing as a download. So if you want to play around with these loops, I'll also include the Cinema 4D files. So if you know Cinema 4D and you want to kind of like play around with these things, or you want to remix it, or just do weird stuff with it, you're welcome to do so. You can also find the final video that I made on my website. This can be found right here at Movecraft, and if you come to work and come to the startup shutdown sessions, you can go ahead and watch that whole video if you like, that Nonagon and I produced. Okay, so thanks very much, guys. I hope to see you again on another VDMX tutorial.